Hello everybody, welcome back to episode 18 of the Second Place Timeline Alternate Presidential Histories. Today we have Democrat nominee, New Hampshire, I think, Senator, New Hampshire, I said New Hampshire, Senator Franklin Pierce with his running mate, Pennsylvania Senator James Buchanan. And for the Republican nominee, we have Associate Justice John McClain with his running mate, I think, Ohio Senator John C. Dayton. Correct me if I'm wrong. As you can see, I have all the states that were determined by 16 points or more on this map. These states aren't going to change no matter what, but this is just a basic map for me to use. This is the format I'm going to start using for now on. So that gives Franklin Pierce 81 electoral votes to John McClain's 30 electoral votes. Now, some background on this presidential race. Of course, George Dallas, if you remember, he was the nominee for the Democrats 12 years ago. And 2 years after he had lost to Theodore Frelinghuysen, he had gone back. He had won another term to the Senate, and he became very influential. He would become the party leader, the Senate Democrat leader, let's say majority leader in the Senate. He would win that 2 years later. And, he started skyrocketing the pro-slavery stuff. He started skyrocketing the whole term limits for the presidency. Democrats were split. Northern Democrats said 2 terms, and Southern Democrats said 1. And George M. Dallas was very much up for 2 terms. That was split so they could never get anything passed, as Republicans were always like, no term limits. So there's that, and a bunch of other stuff. Those are the 2 major ones. Franklin Pierce was very much up for... Franklin Pierce will go on the campaign trail and say, I'm probably only going to have 1 term, but unless something major happens, then I'll run again if something major happens. So he eventually said, I'm up to run for re-election again. So let's start looking at this map. So let's start taking a look. California, I think that would go to John McClain by a likely margin. I think this is where California starts getting more and more closer as, oh crap, I did not mean to do that. Let me see. Oh, give me a second. I'm so sorry. Oh my Jesus Christ. Pi. There we go. I'm so sorry for that. I'm so sorry you had to see that. Give me a second. Let me fix the map. Back to what I was saying. California is going to start getting closer and closer, though we will be seeing changes in the future elections. I promise you that. But California would be won by like 9 points by John McClain. He would win Iowa by the same margin. It would be close. However, here in the Deep South, Georgia, Louisiana, those would be decided by safe margins. Tennessee will be safe as well. Florida would go to Franklin Pierce by a lean margin. He'd win that easy. After 12 years of Republican, Florida and independents would be like, okay, let's put in Franklin Pierce. North Carolina would be decided by a likely margin. Very close race not a very close race in North Carolina. It'd be decided by 7-8 points. Kentucky, he'd win that by a lean margin, so he gets that southern vote. He'd actually flip New Hampshire, winning his home state by a lean margin, shocking a bunch of people. McClain would win Connecticut by a likely margin. He'd win Maryland likely, but Delaware safe, in my opinion. He'd win New York safe, definitely, as well. Like, no question. Ohio, that would be given to McClain by a likely margin as well, in my opinion. But Michigan and Wisconsin, that would go to good old Franklin Pierce. No questions asked. Illinois, that would go safe to good old McClain, and he would flip Indiana. That would go safe to him. Missouri, that would be the closest race, of course, but I do think that a good old Franklin Pierce will edge out in the state, giving him the election in general. So there you go. He would have good old support all around, especially in the South. I think he would parade the whole 1-term thing in the South. You wouldn't hear it much up in the North. He would go down in places like Kentucky and Missouri and be like, 1 term is all I'm planning, but again, I could run for a 2nd term if something major happens. But I don't plan on running for a 3rd term. So there you go. Franklin Pierce becomes the next president of the United States with 159 electoral votes to John McClain's 137. Now let's take a look what happens during Franklin Pierce's 1st term. Now let's start taking a look at Franklin Pierce's 1st term in office. In 1857, the Supreme Court ruling for Dred Scott versus Sanford remains the same. It would have multiple Democrat backings. Of course, Vice President Buchanan and President Pierce would stay away from that, hoping not to take away that Rust Belt and New Hampshire vote, and New Jersey as well, because, you know, Northerners would not be happy with that. If you don't know what Dred Scott versus Sanford is, essentially stating that former slaves and slaves have no rights as citizens. That's essentially what I got from it. In Utah, the Utah War begins. If you don't know what the Utah War is, it's essentially like a mini civil war within the country between Mormons and non-Mormons. That's essentially how I got it. Now, the SS Central America, a boat, I guess you can call it, a ship, sinks off of the coast of North Carolina. Why is it always my state? And it kills 425 people. The Mountain Meadows Massacre occurs in Utah. Of course, like, this whole thing in, like, massacres and all that good stuff. The Panic of 1857 occurs, causing a kind of like a small little recession that happens that, you know, continues throughout the rest of the year, but, you know, Pierce picks it back up in the beginning of 1858. The financial crisis did not occur in Europe due to the funding not going into U.S. railways. Remember, the amendment, I think it was the 14th Amendment passed by John Quincy. Yeah, it was the 14th Amendment passed by John Quincy Adams that prohibited government funding towards stuff like railroads and roads and all that. So, you know, eventually we will not have a Department of Transportation. Eventually. When we get there, I'll explain all that. 1858, the U.S. and the Yankton Sioux tribe sign a treaty. You know, we get the Dakota Territory, essentially. Minnesota becomes the 33rd state. That stays the same. And the U.S. and Japan sign the Harris Treaty. 1859, Oregon becomes the 33rd state. That stays the same. And the Pikes Peak Gold Rush begins in Colorado. 1860, the Wyatt Massacre occurs. More massacres in Pierce's term, that's great. And the Purdue War begins, but as swiftly as it started, it quickly ends, as Pierce puts a stop to that, much faster than Buchanan did. And I'm going to leave this with a question for the next episode. Does secession happen? Do we go into a civil war? Find out next time. But anyway, guys, this is the Chaotic One saying, peace.